Hello everyone and welcome to our lecture 3, and we are going to speak about segregated and integrated communities this time, and I hope you had a chance to read Block. Okay, so how do we characterize integrated and segregated communities? Integrated community is a community of possibilities and close ties among its members. Community exists for the sake of belonging and takes its identity from the gift, generosity, and accountability of its citizens. This kind of community has the capacity, expertise, program leaders, regulations, and wealth required to end unnecessary suffering, inequities, injustices, and create an alternative future. Segregated communities, what are characteristics of those communities? First, what's noticeable is that they are devaluing social ties. The only true measure of community is its economic prosperity. So associations and services are under constant pressure to be more corporate. So the public benefit sector makes front page news only when there is some kind of a scandal. So what we can see is that, and especially in the US, that in the poor neighborhoods, people depend on each other, while in affluent, they don't even know each other. They don't say hello to each other. Segregation leads to reinforcing of isolation and self-interest. So we can have rising fear, which leads to more policing, oversight, and pressure, which are some of the preconditions and outcomes in segregated communities. Okay, so let's talk about an important case of segregation from the US history that led to the famous Brown versus Board of Education legislation in 1954. So in 1950s in the US, schools were segregated based on race. And Linda Brown, and this is her picture, she was at that time age 7. She was from Topeka, Kansas. So she used to travel by foot and by bus 21 blocks from her house to her all-black elementary school. And also she had to walk through a train yard, which was pretty risky, dangerous. At the same time, there was an all-white school 7 blocks away, much closer to her house. So her father decided to sue the principal of the all-white school because he didn't allow her to attend. That was the law. And then 200 other people, plaintiffs, joined this suit, and from other states and the District of Columbia, and they were all, this became a big case, and the legal counsel who represented the plaintiffs was Thurgood Marshall. So this was a very historical, important event in the US history. So what happened? So justice system, it went to the Supreme Court, right? This case went to the Supreme Court, and as we know, justice is an executive, judiciary is the executive branch, and they recognized the historical moment and made this right decision, surprising decision for that time. So let me just give you, I'll read what the judge actually said, because it's really very straightforward and to the point. And these words really um, reveal the essence of the situation, and how unjust actually the system was. And um, it's great that it was repaired in some way. Well, that was the beginning. So it just says that segregation of public schools solely on the basis of race, even though the physical facilities and other tangible factors may be equal, deprive children of the minority group of equal educational opportunities. We believe that it does. To separate them from others of similar age and qualifications solely because of their race generates a feeling of inferiority as to their status in the community that may affect their hearts and minds in a way unlikely ever to be undone. We conclude that in the field of public education, the doctrine of separate but equal has no place. Separate educational facilities are inherently unequal. So these are the words of the judge Earl Warren. So here we have a map of school desegregation in 1964. I don't know if you can see it, but possibly you can enlarge it in the PowerPoint slides, which I will also publish. But the decision of the Supreme Court did not bring public school segregation to an immediate end because states were implementing this legislation at different speed. But change was taking place, although slowly. So in 1955, the Supreme Court issued a second ruling calling for integration of schools with all deliberate speed. So they wanted to speed up the process. And in 1964, however, 1964, mind you, that's almost like 10 years after this ruling, less than 11% of African American students in 17 southern states and DC were attending integrated schools. So that's an indication of the speed. Okay, so another important example at a high school level was Little Rock crisis in 1957. So in 1957, 75 African American students filled out applications to enter Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. And the Board of Education narrowed this number to 9. All exceptional students with great educational backgrounds, good grades. So these 9 students who were known as the Little Rock 9, they faced a lot of resistance as they tried to enter the school. So here is a picture from that time indicative of what was happening. And here we have the words of President Eisenhower. I'm not going to read it, you can read it. President Eisenhower words that further show the struggle that is taking place at the local and federal level. So there is this constant struggle between local and federal. So implementing legislation takes time, right? This Little Rock, this crisis, the resistance to integration led even to the involvement of soldiers, so on. And then also the busing begins. What was the busing? Parents and students were going together to these newly integrated schools just to kind of ensure the safety of children. But it's also important to mention is that integration was not always seen as negative, and it was not always opposed. So in many cases, integration was welcome, as you can see in this welcoming committee, John Marshall High School. So they welcome so the administration of the school welcomed the integration of students. And here is you can see the picture of an integrated school. And so it's the beginning of what we have today. So it's an interesting, very interesting case of segregated, how segregation, segregated communities were reflected in education system. And you also have an article in the readings that I gave you, which is it's on the case in the Balkans, Mostar, famous Mostar gymnasium, which is a segregated school, high school in Bosnia. But here, in this school, segregation is based on ethnicity. So you have, and it's currently, it's happening, right? So it's not a matter of the past. It's basically a consequence of war, of a terrible war that took place in the Balkans in 1990s. So the students are segregated. You have two communities, Croats and Bosnian Muslims, who go to different classes at different times in this school. And in this case, segregation was justified by the need of each community to use their own mother tongue. And this mother tongue, okay, it's Bosnian, but basically it was, before the war, it was called Serbo-Croatian. And in essence, Bosnian Muslims and Croats and Serbs in Bosnia speak the same language, possibly with little different dialects, but it's the same language. So, but they use language to justify this need to be segregated, and also they used difference in historical narrative, and especially what happened in the recent war and in the Second World War, because now the history was rewritten and two communities have totally different narratives about what happened in the past. So what's interesting is that it's still there, these communities are still segregated, unfortunately. And here you have this bridge actually in some of your books for conflict resolution, and this is a famous Mostar bridge. And what are bridges are a symbol of connectivity, of bringing people together, right? But it's so interesting that, and this bridge actually is newly rebuilt. It's an ancient bridge that was destroyed in the war, but it was rebuilt. And now it's really like, it's a bit of a controversial symbol because it's a symbol of connectivity in a very divided city. Okay, so now let's move to change. How does change happen? And what can be done, to address issues and injustice and inequities, and how to move from segregated to more integrated communities. Well, what we can see is that change happens through community organizing, leadership, and activism. And I would also invite you, when you look at the PowerPoint slides for this lecture, you will see a little link, so you can watch that video when you see the PowerPoint. So civil rights movement in the US and in other places, this civil rights movement or the movements against colonization, movements against oppression of some groups, they did not have only one leader. So civil rights movement, had one prominent leader, Martin Luther King, but there were many other leaders at the communal level, right? So let's see, for example, Rosa Parks. Who was she? She became an international icon of resistance to segregation, the US. So she was an activist in the civil rights movement, best known for her role in Montgomery bus boycott. So what happened? In 1955 in Montgomery, Alabama, she refused to obey the bus driver Blake's order to give up her seat in the colored section to the white passenger, which was kind of a law. So this led to her prominence, and she became a symbol of resistance to segregation, to these unjust laws that were in place at that time. But in recent times, we have other activists, especially, and those activists are doing great fight, but we don't know much about them. So one of them is, for example, Asma Janagir, who is a heroine of human rights in Pakistan. And she actually attempted to change the system through activism, but also practice of law, because she was a lawyer. So if you want to learn more about her, also have a look at the video. You have a link in PowerPoint slides under this particular slide. And I would end this lecture with Gandhi's quote. Gandhi, as you know, was a proponent. He was a leader of the Indian struggle for liberation from colonial British power. So he was a proponent of nonviolent struggle for justice and equality. And he said, "You must be the change you wish to see in the world." So what he meant by that is that we all have the capacity, right, to, in our own way, contribute to the positive change. Okay. So I would finish with this, and thank you all for listening. And I really look forward to your blogs and reflections on this week's readings. Thank you very much.